Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our sort of friend, the Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah, it's our friend, why not? It plays the games. We're going to talk about it. I've had it for a couple days now, and it's kind of time for, I wouldn't say final thoughts because it's got years ahead of it, but first impressions, really. And just kind of the, I don't know, initial predictions. It's just an all-purpose, let's just talk some Nintendo Switch 2 type of video. Before we do that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. And if you won't like the video for me, maybe like it for Bob Ross. He was a great guy. Okay. So, Nintendo Switch 2. Basically, so I got one on launch day. I did my unboxing video, kind of gave my first impressions of just physically, like I like the design. It is very nice. I love the kickstand. I actually didn't know that the kickstand was so robust on the thing, even though the portability element of the system doesn't mean much to me, and I know that's a little weird to a lot of people, because that was kind of like almost the whole point of the Nintendo Switch, and I guess the Switch 2 to a lot of people was the portability, taking a true game console on the go and then having the ability to dock it. But I've always treated this first Switch, much like the second one is my intention, is just a home console that I happen to be able to take out and make portable if I choose to. There's this misconception of me throughout the years on my channel that I hate handhelds. Hate implies I actively loathe, which is ridiculous. I've just never preferred that over the concept of using a television. Maybe because I was a spoiled child that actually had access to a television without having to play there in like the, in the living room while my parents did something else or whatever. Like, I don't know the psychological reason for that, but I've always just preferred playing on a TV. And to that end, I still own a TV, and I'd rather play a game that way. So, we're going to talk about the first impressions I had of the system, actually setting it up, using it, what it was like to play Mario Kart, etc. And then just kind of the quirks and oddities and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I did the unboxing, and after that was over, I kind of settled for a second. And I don't mean to depress you here, but it kind of dawned on me, like, right after I finished filming it, like, while I was about to edit it, that might have been the last unboxing of a game console I will ever do on this channel. Maybe not, not including maybe some like retro console or some re-release or something like that, but like a brand new console. And if you'll indulge me here for a second, I've been maintaining for years that consoles are coming to their end. It's just it's a technological necessity at a certain point. Like, I've been on the physical media team forever. I think anybody who knows me and watches my channel knows that. And, I've never, I don't knock people who are like, I want to play things digitally. I want to just game on PC. However you want to play your games, feel free. Enjoy yourself. But to me, a gaming experience has always been more than that. It's been more than the actual title. It's been the history of the system, the charm of it is the term I always used. The whole package deal. To me, something like the Sega Saturn isn't just the digital files that worked on that piece of hardware. It was the cosmetic design of the system, the design of the controller, the box art of the games, the manuals, the discs, how you could uniquely identify a Sega Saturn disc, not just by the artwork, but even the disc, by looking at the bottom and seeing the wobble, how it was printed on there, all that sort of stuff. Every little bit of that is what I would call charm. Those things that when you were much younger, you would see like legitimate debates on when you were in school, where kids are talking about, well, the N64 used cartridges so it doesn't have load times. Well, the PlayStation has like better video, like whatever it was. Those types of things are lost as the industry has kind of unified around the same type of hardware and digitized to the point where you don't have the blockbuster experience of going inside and perusing the new titles you hadn't heard of and couldn't afford, but you wanted to try, and you could get one there, or you could go to the Toys R Us experience and do the same thing. As you both know, or as you know, both of those places basically don't exist anymore, at least in the United States. There's one Blockbuster left. Shout out to our boys in Bend, Oregon. And then Toys R Us, to be fair, is in other countries, and it's kind of making a return, but Toys R Us kind of sucks now. Anyway, that's a whole different point. My point is, the store shelf experience is kind of going away. And ironically, that concept is kind of the only reason there is any physical media left within the Switch itself. This is a side point that we're going to come back to, but yeah, just hold that thought. But anyway, on this point, it dawned on me that I really truly do not believe that Microsoft's next iteration of hardware, and I do think there will be one, is going to use any sort of physical media. It's obvious that Microsoft wants out. Like, they've wanted out for years, but they kind of need to do it. I still believe they need a dedicated box of some kind with local hardware for processing, as streaming tech is just simply not there for games yet. But I don't think they value any element of physical media anymore. I don't think they have for a very long time. Sony, I will admit, is coin toss, man. Like, I don't know if, like, the PS5 Pro obviously natively didn't have one. It technically supports it. We might be looking at that type of situation again. I don't know. Discs, at least, are much cheaper to produce than carts. That's always been the way it is. But then you get to the Switch 2. And here's where this is significant. So the Switch 2 has effectively 3, sort of 4 different means by which you can play games on it. Well, it's sort of 5 if you include the backwards compatibility, but we're going to ignore that one for now. Number 1, anything that's digital. Anything that was acquired through the eShop or Nintendo Switch Online services, anything. All in purposes, that's one method of delivery. Sort of number 2 would be like the if you go to a store and they have like a physical case and you open it up and there's no cart inside, it's just a piece of paper with a digital code, which effectively is you bought a plastic case for a download code in the eShop. We're going to talk about why they still do that in a second. Then you have what they just introduced, which is the thing that's kind of infamous now, is the key cards. The very misleading edition of physical media. I think this needs to be explained. Because there are people, I get a lot of people my age, in my age range who watch my channel. You get a lot of people who became dads and they're interested in the hobby, but they have to stick their head out of the bubble all the time because they got to take their kids to something, their wife, whatever. And then occasionally they pop back in like, there's a Switch 2? What happened? Like, I get that a lot. And so to those guys, shout out. Thanks for helping to contribute to not a population crisis. It's good. We need more people. Anyway, so to those guys in particular, game key cards. This is the way that most Nintendo Switch physical, did I say that in heavy, dripping, sarcastic quotations, are going to be delivered to stores. Now, the key card is basically a little blueprint on a Switch cart. It doesn't actually contain any game data. You put it into the Switch recognizes what it is, or the Switch 2 in this case, recognizes what it is and downloads the entire game. To Nintendo's credit, they did not make them a one-time use thing. Basically, once you take it out, just like a physical edition, the game will not load up without the keycard registered in there. But it is also resellable. So, like, GameStop theoretically will take it. I don't know what their policy on game cards is specifically. But the actual card contains no real data. Now, while Nintendo's servers continue to be supported and maintained, and that will be the case for many years to come, one day, I don't know when, but one day, they will simply go down in perpetuity. And all those games will not function. I don't know when that will happen, but, like, it will, inevitably. And that's the scariest part about that, is not only the preservation element from a historical and cultural perspective and data perspective, but to an entire generation, like Gen Alpha, that will be growing up with this, like, it's going to be very difficult for them to revisit their childhood the way that millennials had the ability to do. I'm a millennial. We were the first generation in human history that was able to archive our own childhoods, because we were the first generation exposed to the internet and the last generation that grew up without it. And the result was that we became the nostalgia generation. When we looked back and thought about, man, I remember the Power Rangers and that was so cool, and Ninja Turtles. Well, wait a minute. Everything was recorded on VCRs back then, and then DVDs became a quick thing, and then we also were right there as YouTube was. Let's just put everything out. Oh man, we can go instantly revisit our childhood in a way our parents could never do. Gen Z kind of inherited the same thing, but with us kind of overlapping on top of them, just because we were such a bigger generation than them, and they kind of benefit from that. Whereas Gen Alpha is going to reach a point where their childhood is purely historic. You know, like you're going to say like, oh, remember when I remember when I was a little, like we're talking a kid who's like 1 or 2 now, and they play this, and this is their first memory of any sort of Mario. Well, okay, maybe like 3 or 4, whatever. But like they play it for the first time, much like I played Super Mario World when I was like 4, 5 maybe. And for the SNES, I remember playing it at my cousin's house in his basement on Thanksgiving, and I immediately died on the very first level. Didn't know how to jump, just ran right into the first Goomba. And to this day, my Super Nintendo that I got as a result of that, and my copy of Super Mario World as I got a result of that, those exact copies, they work. It's right over there. I could turn it on and I could immediately play it. 30 plus years later. The kid who is doing that right now, in 30 years, I mean, granted not this game because it's actually physical, but other games that they get into are just not going to work, you know? Unless it's a hacked system, which is a whole different discussion. So I guess the reason I'm making that all kind of out there is I think people really need to understand the dangers of that. I've been talking about this for the better part of a decade plus, 16 years I've been on YouTube. I've been talking about this almost the entire time. Beware of the digital future and what it takes from you. It provides you with some convenient access to things while stripping you of consumer rights. And that really bothers me. And the Switch 2, unfortunately, largely is very guilty of that. So that brings us to the fourth method, which is, of course, the actual physical editions. And that's what you get with Mario Kart World. This needs some explanation. So those game key card things, they're just a blueprint to download a game. Then you have Nintendo actually developing a 64 gigabyte card that developers can choose to use that they can actually put data on. However, the cards are very expensive. So far, it's really just Nintendo using them. This is one of the few games that actually put the data on the game. Now, that said, the game still needed an update, of course, because that's the world we live in now, but at least the base build of the game is there. And is not utterly dependent upon a server to function. Granted, it would be limited because of the online nature of the game, but my point is it's playable anyway in some form. But the thing with those cards is, and people have been saying like, well, why don't they make smaller cards or whatever? Because here's, all right, I'm not going to name names, but I have worked in the video game industry for a very long time. I am a YouTuber, yes, but I cover video game content. I have for, as I just said, 16 years. I've made some friends along the way, and we talk. And a lot of them are developers. And a lot of them are not happy about this. Because a lot of them, as you can imagine, the people who would naturally be attracted to my content are very pro-physical media. And they're looking at it like, Nintendo has really got us kind of by the balls here. Because we're very pro-physical media, but it's prohibitively expensive to use their true physical media cards. Partially because Nintendo refuses to make smaller chip sizes. They won't do 8 gigabytes. Like, if you're a developer who's got like an indie game that's like a gigabyte, that means you have no choice but to stick it on a 64 gigabyte card where 63 of the gigabytes are never used. Like, CD Projekt Red was willing to do that for Cyberpunk, but they filled almost the entire cart, and they're a much bigger company. But they're also, like me, of the mindset like this should really be done correctly. Whereas even my beloved Sega was like, yeah, game keys, they're just cheaper, which is disappointing. But if you're one of these indie devs, and the ones I've been talking to have largely been like, I don't know what we're going to do. Some of them are saying like we might just stick with Switch 1 support as long as we possibly can because it's backwards compatible, etc. I don't know. But the reason it's so expensive to actually put your games on those things is partially because Nintendo refuses to do smaller sizes, but also external factors that frankly aren't Nintendo's fault. And I'm not going to go into the geopolitics of this, but chip production has gotten a lot more expensive since certain events in Russia, China, and Taiwan. And that's all I really need to say on that one. But basically, it's gotten a lot more expensive to produce that stuff. And that means they have to be more selective. The consequence for us as gamers and enthusiasts is that stuff becomes more expensive and a lot more limiting. So where I stand with the Switch 2 is, I guess this is important to understand because now we're going to talk about my actual usage case with it. So after I did the unboxing and I had my little melodramatic thought of, oh man, last console unboxing, ooh. After all that was over, I actually sat down and I, turned on the system. Now, for those who saw my unboxing, I did not have Mario Kart World at the time. FedEx did not deliver it on time, so I had the system but not the game. So really all I could do was turn the console on and prepare for updates. Now, The system update, here's the thing with the system. The system absolutely does require an update to basically do anything. However, you won't really have a problem doing that, because if you have an internet connection, one, that'll solve the problem. Or two, if you have any physical Switch cart, whether it's the true physical one or even the game key cards, granted that too would require an internet update. Basically, there's an update on the cards. I think maybe the key cards do. I don't have one of those, but I think, if I recall correctly, the game key cards will also update the Switch 2 firmware so that it starts, doing stuff. So anyway, I updated the whole thing, and then you get to a certain point in there where you're like, okay, do you want to transfer your stuff from your Switch 1 to your Switch 2? Here's the thing. My user experience here is going to be very different, because while I do have a Switch 1 and a substantial library for it, I do not care about bringing it over to the Switch 2. I see Switch 2 as its own standalone thing, and Switch 1 support in it purely as a bonus feature. Purely. Mostly because that's how I have always been. Like, I didn't buy a PlayStation 2 going, dude, I can play PS1 games on it. Like, I got it for the PS2. PS1 support was nice, but like, to me, it's just a separate entity. Now, yeah, I'm very happy Nintendo put backwards compatibility into it, and granted, it was a little limited. They decided to do a mixture of hardware and software emulation. Now, to be fair to Nintendo on this one, they did kind of come out and start talking about it, and they said, like, yeah, there's going to be some stuff that doesn't work, etc., and it's maybe a little buggy here and there. But as it's been out there now, there's a lot of people saying, well, actually, some of the games run a lot better. And I kind of chalk this up without having... Honestly, I'm not an emulator guy. I think that should be kind of obvious, but I do know enough about emulators to know when you use them, and I'm sure you have, there's pluses and minuses as opposed to the original hardware. Like, sometimes the resolution will be better, they'll run faster, that type of thing, but then you're also introducing bugs that did not exist there originally because you have a kind of hat-on-a-hat type of system working. Basically, that seems to be the case with the Switch 2 running Switch 1 games. They need updates, by the way. Also, if you do not update the Switch 2 out of the box with either a Switch 2 cart or an internet connection, you try to stick a Switch 1 game in there immediately, it's not going to do anything. It needs an update first. So you have to go back to having the internet connection, and once you have that, it's going to do the system update anyway. Okay, keep that in mind. But basically what I'm saying is, I do not really care about using Switch 1 stuff on this. There are, in some scenarios, some advantages, and in some scenarios, some disadvantages. All I'm really trying to say is, pros and cons. It's nice that it's there. It personally means nothing to me, but I also would argue that if you're out there thinking, okay, I'm going to get a Switch 2, I have a Switch 1, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to trade in my Switch 1 and put the trade credit towards the system. You can do that, but I'm telling you that's a stupid idea. Like, they're going to give you pennies on the dollar for that right now, because everyone else had the same idea, and keep in mind, the Switch 1 is currently the second most successful video game console ever produced, only to the PlayStation 2, and might even surpass it. So to that end, you're not going to get much of anything, and Switch 1s are going to be worthless. You will basically lose something that means something to you on an emotional level for basically nothing. Granted, you're an adult, probably. Do whatever you want. But I'm telling you from a financial perspective, it is not a smart move. However, if you've never had a Switch 1, and you're here for some reason, they're going to be really cheap soon, so look forward to getting them. Anyway, that's, like, I'll probably pick up, they'll probably be in junk bins in Japan by, like, the truckload. It'll be, like, ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, so like I said, I keep it that way. Now, the reason I brought that up is there is that transfer process. Personally, I skipped over it because I don't care, and I don't have a Nintendo Switch Online account, and I don't care about any of my saves over there. I don't care about any of that, so I just create a new account, move on. My setup process was very short. I was able to get into the system in like a minute or two. I set the thing to like the dark theme, like just so it looks better, and tinkered with a little bit of settings, but like HDR stuff, but really nothing particularly significant. Speaking of which, screen quality on this thing, pretty good. I'm used to the OG Switch, the launch one. That's what I've had the whole time. I never upgraded to the OLED or any of that stuff. So the screen on this one is nice. However, it is not as nice as the OLED on the original Switch, like the Switch OLED edition, but that's a given because this is an LED versus an OLED. It's always going to be that way. And I imagine probably in a couple years from now we'll see the Switch 2 OLED model. It seems just kind of obvious. But yeah, it's a good screen all the same. Now granted, I didn't sit here and play much on that screen because again, I prefer a TV. So I primarily just sat there and played Mario Kart World, as you can imagine. Required an update, like I said. Beautiful game. It's a lot of fun. I was really enjoying that game. And that's kind of where it awkwardly puts me with the Switch 2. I hate so much of its policies. I hate so much of what surrounds it. You know, I hate game keys. I hate the fact that so many people are celebrating, really, like, the death of physical media. Not you guys. If you're watching this video and you're a viewer of mine, you clearly care about that. But just so many people don't care. And that's how that was going to go. We kind of always knew that. You know, the last real opportunity to win a physical media war was in the Xbox One DRM debacle back in 2013. Like, it's been 12 years. It's over. This is just the last gasp of it. So, me personally, I've kind of made the decision that the only games I'm going to pick up for the Switch 2 are exclusive titles that are also physical. Because the other thing is, with this, Nintendo has finally entered the 9th generation. Yes, the Switch 1 was an 8th gen console, and yes, to all the people who ask, I will be doing an 8th gen recap at some point. Which, by the way, is a side note there, because it's kind of interesting to see the 8th generation is finally technically wrapped up, starting in 2012 with the Wii U, and ending in 2025 with the Switch 1. 13 years, not bad. But it'll be fun to go back and revisit that. Give me some time on that one, okay? Give me some time on that one. But, yeah, it's... With this, I think that the way I'm going to approach it, honestly, is because I basically flat out refuse to get into the game key cards. The only exceptions I would make to that would literally be something like Shenmue content. Like if it was Shenmue 3, like ININ picked up the rights to that. They're probably going to reissue it on Switch 2, and they're a little indie company. They're probably just going to do a game key card. I wouldn't even play it on the Switch 2. You know, I would get it as a display piece, be like, yeah, that artwork is nice. But like, I would pick up the PS5 edition or the Xbox edition of that, and that's how I would actually play it. And that kind of goes for a lot of the stuff, because now that Nintendo is actually in the 9th generation, granted they would still have the weakest hardware in this generation, at least a lot of the other stuff that's been produced can finally be brought over. And to that end, there's a lot of games that are coming over. But they're gimped compared to the alternatives, and that's not new. Like we experienced this with the first Switch, but at least with the first Switch, you had the advantage of like, yeah, that's fine. I still have the portability element of it, and it's physical, etc. Now you don't have the physical part. You really just have the portability, and for a lot of people, that's all that matters, and that's fine. Granted, that was before the Steam Deck existed, although that doesn't seem to be taking much out of the Nintendo Pi, does it? So, whatever. Where I finally sit on this thing is I have enjoyed playing Mario Kart World on it, and I'm sure I will enjoy Donkey Kong Bonanza and maybe the other handful of games that I ever get for it that are truly physical editions and most likely just Nintendo content. Unless something changes in that regard where they, for some reason, bring up more physical editions. But I want to circle back to something I said before, which was about why the store shelves thing still matters. Like we were talking about Toys R Us, Blockbuster. As it turns out, one of the biggest decisions, I read this online, so, okay, take it with a grain of salt, but this makes a lot of sense, because I'd even speculated on this in a podcast. Turns out there is some truth to it. Turns out that one of the biggest reasons Nintendo did this, particularly game key card thing, was not only to save on production costs, but because, particularly in Japan, the way a lot of people learn about what games are out there is just by going into a store and seeing stuff on a shelf. Because digital ecosystems have an inherent limitation, which is you must already own the hardware and be browsing it in order to have any chance of seeing what's out there. And even then, you really only see what comes up on the front page unless you choose manually to browse within a subgenre and just see what's there. Within a store, you just turn your head around and there's just a whole bunch of stuff there. And so a lot of these simply exist in their most reduced form. Like, this is a very basic plastic case. There is no manual. It is basic artwork. The cart is small. Granted, at least in this case, it's a real cart. It must exist on a store shelf. Not so much that people buy it, but so that people know it exists and then choose to buy it. It's advertising. It is cheaper to advertise in that method of keeping stuff in a store than it is to just get rid of that and try to blast more ads in other unconventional places, at least for now in 2025. So that is sadly the one argument that might convince someone like Microsoft or Sony, granted they're not human beings, but as corporations, to continue to do that. But if you actually, like, I travel the world, I get around. Sony is still playing that game. Microsoft is mostly not outside the US, and even in the US, they're playing it. There's like very limited Xbox sections because they just don't care about the physical side of it. Granted, that's Microsoft and all their problems, but for Nintendo's purposes, that argument still makes sense. So, for me, I'm glad that they're at least sort of doing physical media. It's very disappointing the method by which they did it. But honestly, it kind of saves me a little bit because now I have much less incentive to spend a bunch of money on this thing over the course of time. It's like, oh, there's this cool game coming out. It'd be nice to play it, but like the only true physical edition of it exists on PS5. I guess I'll go over there. It's just what it is. The only other thing I could really... All right, so let's talk accessories, right? So I have a Pro controller. However, this is, and I'll give Nintendo credit on this, this is a Switch 1 Pro controller. This is the German-made one that came out like, 8 years ago or whatever when the system did. I bought it right away. And because I'm not a fan of the Joy-Cons. I'm not a fan of these. I'm not a fan of the originals. They're not bad. They're just not for me. I'm not a child. Like, that works if you're playing it portably like this. But when you actually take them off, I just never liked that. Even when you put them on the dog face controller and all that, I didn't like that either. So I was like, I need a real beefy controller. So I'll be honest, I had intended to pick up the Switch 2 Pro controller eventually. But then when I was told, oh no, you can just use the Switch 1 Pro controller and it'll actually work with Switch 2 games, at least currently. It certainly worked with this. I was like, oh, I'll just do that. Like, why spend the extra money? Like, it's already expensive enough as it is. So that was the end of the day what I ended up doing. And I was happy with that decision because I like this controller and I don't like that one. But all I'm trying to say is I will give Nintendo credit for allowing backwards compatibility not only in games but also in hardware. That was, at least they get a point for that. So overall, Switch 2 in of itself is not a bad piece of hardware, at least not in my opinion. If you know the Switch, you already kind of know what to expect. It's in every way just upgrades. It's just the policies around it that I don't like, particularly the stance on physical media. Game key cards, I'm out. I want nothing to do with that. But at least the real physical ones, what few exist, hey, maybe that'll make an interesting subset. Like if you want to do collecting of stuff, I don't know. But yeah, for now I'm having fun with it, but I'm only having fun because it's literally Mario Kart World. I don't know how many other games I'll end up picking up for this thing. As I said before, I primarily got it to show you guys, to make the video, and in some sense, potentially kind of do the last ride. And that would actually include this video because if you think about it, if there is never another console that's new that I find worth picking up, because I'm telling you now, I'm not buying all digital infrastructure consoles. Consoles, I say in quotations. I didn't buy stuff like the Ouya when they tried that originally. Or the, what was that one that Mad Catz put out, the OnLive or whatever. I didn't buy any of those, not because they were junk. I own an FM Towns Marty. I just got one. I own a Casio Loopy. I own all sorts, Apple Pippin. I like my obscure, weird, crappy consoles. What I don't like is digital ecosystems that say I'm not allowed to own them. That's what I don't like. And so if Sony and Microsoft truly do not do that, if they don't give us any sort of option, then this is the end of the line. So this would be the last console first impressions video, which is a little depressing for anybody who's been watching the channel for a long time. But hey, hopefully that's not the case. But it's not looking good. Anyway, let's go out on a positive note. The nicest thing I can say about it, again, it's a nice, fun little piece of hardware. And if you are like me and the whole thing about physical media stresses you out, compartmentalize it. Just be like, look, I'll just get the games that actually support physical media, and that'll be the machine that I use. It's kind of an expensive justification, no dispute there. But, if you are a millennial like me, you got to remember something. This wasn't made for us. It was made for Gen Z and lower. Like, we can benefit enjoying it. They're cashing in on our nostalgia. As I said, we're the nostalgia generation for a reason. But, like, to my fellow millennials, this was inevitable. We were eventually going to be pushed out of being relevant as far as what these products are intended for. And in some ways, this is really intended for the millennial who has kids and wants to show it to them, But I don't know. I'm not a dad. I'm not going to be. So I can only think of it from my perspective, or at least I try to. Anywho, Yes. That said, Mario Kart World's great. Go play it. Oh, yeah. And one other thing that is actually kind of cool about it is, I don't have these, but I have been reading some of this stuff about how there are Switch 2 editions of games like Breath of the Wild and so on and so forth that actually work on the Switch 1. You just don't get all the upgrades and stuff. I'm debating if I want to get some of those. Like, they did physical editions of Breath of the Wild for Switch 2 and all that. I don't know. I'd have to read more into, like, which one is, like, the full game, or if it's just the Switch one with some DLC on it, or what that actually is. But if you guys know, please let me know. This was the only one I knew for sure I absolutely wanted. Like, when I saw that showcase, the reveal, this was the game that I was like, okay, that's cool. As long as it's truly physical, and it turns out it was, then I'm willing to pick this system up. So I'm just hoping for more experiences like this, because this is actually a very fun game. Okay, enough rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed it, as depressing as it is. But do me a favor, please, for Bob Ross, like this video, comment down below. Honestly, comment. Tell me stuff, because I cannot read your minds, you know? I've had a lot of people give me, like, feedback, like, on outside source. I'm like, just comment in the channel there. You can, I read it. I really do. So like it, comment, subscribe. I especially appreciate that one. And then check out all the social media stuff in the description. You can find me in other places. You've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord. That one's always good. We have a whole community of nerds that love to talk about this stuff. Patreon, I really appreciate the support over there. Obviously, keeps the channel afloat so I can buy stupid stuff like this so that you guys can get that sort of insight. Anyway, so we got that. And we have my travel channel. You know, I appreciate when people actually go over there and check that one out, because I think a lot of people don't even know I have a second channel that is just, here's all the adventures around the world where I accumulate all this random knowledge that I bring to a table so that we can talk about it. There's that. And then if you ever want merch of me for some reason, that is a thing too. You can go to my Spreadshirt. It's all in the description. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.